actually out speaking in somewhere out west, and the phone rang in the hotel room, and I saw that it was Glenda. It was one of those intuitive things. Uh-oh, something's happened, because they never called me.
Yeah.
And so she asked me, and I called Teresa, my wife, and I said, how in the world can we do this? She said, how can we not? And then how can I fill those shoes? Well, you can't fill those shoes. She said, it'll be different, but that's okay. And so I listen to your wife. That's one of the first rules here. Listen to your wife. And so when I called Glenda back the next week, I said, yeah, we'll work it. Fortunately, Alan had what we call retired into the business. He's written a wonderful book about, family business legacy. And in the book, he describes retiring into the business, not retiring from the business, but retiring into the business. And so he had assembled a staff around himself that allowed him at this stage of his life to not have to deal with a lot of the daily nitty-gritty things. If he had not done that, there's no way I could have said yes. But because he had moved to the point where pretty much all that he did was his editorial column and provide a gentle steering on the steering wheel, thematically for the theme of the magazine, I was able to say yes. And so yes, it has been a fascinating transition. I'm 14, 15 months into it, and we can now breathe a big sigh of relief. The magazine did not collapse. In fact, subscriptions are up, advertising is up. We're all exhaling now, saying, okay, we weathered that momentarily, and it has allowed me to bring my entrepreneurial stamp to the magazine as well. And so this year, for the first time in 10 years, Alan got tired of traveling, and they had the Stockman Grass Farmer Schools, the grass production school, the grass finishing school with the Argentinian Anabel Portamingo. I had the pork school with me, marketing school with Sherry and I, my daughter-in-law, and these schools, and they had been traveling with them around the country. But Alan finally, when he got into his 60s, he said, I'm just tired of traveling. People can just come to Jackson where I am. And that was the beginning of a very gentle downward trajectory in the magazine. Profits, subscriptions, advertising, everything slowly began to descend. And so when we had our first summit last spring of 2017, I came with a lot of what my dad used to say, fear and tremulation to the meeting, because these, Carolyn, Alan's widow, and Glenda and Sonny had grown up with the magazine, and they'd been at it for 40 years, and they'd grown up with it. Here I am, this outsider coming in, and but I had ideas, and I am still very much traveling and have my ear to the ground, and felt like I had some things to offer. And so I suggested that we take the school back on the road. And so just less than 2 weeks ago, for the first time in 10 years, we had our first on the road Stockman Grass Farmer Business School. With Steve Kenyon and myself in Cincinnati. It was a blockbuster, and all the readers are excited about taking the schools, all the different schools on the roads. We're going to be in Denver, Dallas, and Indianapolis. We've already been in Cincinnati. I've done 2 in Canada. First time I've ever done any schools in Canada under the Stockman Grass brand name. So it's been real exciting. And the other big thing that's happening is the digitization of the magazine, so that foreign subscribers can get it digitally.
Yeah.
And that is, we had hoped it would be available by now. There's still a couple of glitches to work out, and now it's pushed back to maybe June or so. But for sure, this year, a digital subscription will be available, and we're very excited about that.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's what you described there. It's kind of not that different to consulting, in which you come into someone's place as a relative newbie, and especially those who are existing farmers and or producers, and you come in with all of your fear and trepidation, and
Yeah.
and there's certainly a delicacy there, isn't there?
Yes.
And so how did that get? How was that received when you came in?
Listen,
was it a dynamic place?
Well, I can tell you, interestingly, the Stockman Grass Farmer business model template is very similar to what we've done here at Polyface. They have no hourly workers. Everyone is task oriented, either on commission or straight salary with commission bonuses. And they kind of work into their own hours. Everybody is cross-trained, so everybody can do different things, answer the phone, do mailings and different things. It's quite a dynamic. I mean, it's a very small office. There's 5 or 6 people. Sure. But it's yes, a very empowered and dynamic group. And I don't have the words to describe how open, welcoming. They've just said, look, you lead us, we'll do the work, we'll get the stuff out, we'll get the graphics and the ads sold and the copy made. You just lead us. Wherever you want to lead us is fine with us. And you could not ask for a more open embrace in something as touchy and intimate as this whole thing was. And so I've just been welcomed, and the readership has responded with lots of very positive letters. They all understand that it's different than Alan, but what I've tried to bring to it, of course, Alan's obs. That was why most people subscribe to the magazine. I mean, I'd like to think some of them like my columns, but Alan's obs was so wonderful. And of course, I couldn't do Alan's obs. I had to have something for my own. So I thought a lot about.
Well, you've had your own column for that magazine for a long time as well, that newspaper as well for a long time. So people have been familiar with your voice. Yes.
I had been writing a column in the magazine since about 1989.
Yeah.
So I had 30 some years. I started with it when it was bankrupt, and so I had a long history. For sure, I considered Alan my closest mentor next to my dad. I mean, that's how close we were, and I'm tearing up even talking about it.
Yeah.
He was so special, and I mean, this guy Darren, read a book a day.
Yeah.
And he had a photographic memory. So when he would come to visit here at the farm, I have a lot of books here in the house. And I'd go out and do chores. He'd pull a book off the bookshelf, and he would read it while I was out doing chores. We'd come in to have breakfast, and he'd say, on page 287, where he says he could just look through a manuscript, a book, and pull up paragraphs on a page. It was just inhuman.
Yeah. While you're opening the chook shed, he's down to book.
Yeah, that's right. And so and he would read history, biography, and business, and of course farming, and trains. He's always reading a train book. But anyway, I said, what can I bring to this that it doesn't already have? And so I named my column then. I named it Meadow Talk, and the idea is I want us to be a family. I'm a big believer in we need family. We need our we have our blood family, but we also desperately need our idea family.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have tried to bring this persona of the idea. Let us be your idea family. And meadow talk is okay. We're gonna go down to the meadow and we're gonna have a talk as we go. And some of these talks are encouraging. Some of them are whatever. Sometimes you gotta kind of have a little bit of a whipping. Sometimes you've got to just struggle with unknowns in this discussion. But that's the persona I'm trying to bring, and it's
just as you would if you were to say, let's go for a walk.
Yes, exactly. Let's go for a walk. Let's go down and check the cows and the chooks in the pasture, and let's talk as we walk. And that's the persona that I've tried to bring, and it's helped me be able to find my voice, and it's been real good. My deadline is the 15th of every month, and the biggest kind of fear thing is not the actual writing. I can write. Writing is not a problem. It's what to write about. It's the topic. It's what does our family need to hear this month? What has crossed my desk or my life that I think is an important aspect for our family to know this month? And sometimes it comes in the final hour.
Yeah, sure. Well, luckily I've seen you type. You can type pretty quickly, Joel. So
yes, that's right. I have that down pretty well. So yeah, it's been an incredible blessing. It has certainly cramped my schedule here. I mean, just it's another responsibility. But what a wonderful platform to take this legacy and carry that baton further. And so things that I'm bringing to it, people will see, are already seeing a lot of new young writers, women writers, and we're trying to really, mix it up, make it eclectic. Our vision is that this will be the grass, the iconic grass, real-time conversation for the world.
Yeah.
And that's where we're headed.
Yeah, well, that sounds amazing. And it's what strikes me with all of that you've just said too, Joel, is that you and I have talked a lot about succession, and it seems like Alan did a lot of the groundwork with that, with the way that the organisation was set up, even the way that people are remunerated, all of those sorts of arrangements. He set up the template. Perhaps, I don't know if you ever talked with him about succession and, what would come next, because you never know when you're going to get the knock on the door, and that's it. So, with the grace of God, he was able to go without pain. So,
yes. Well, actually, about 5 years ago, he had a couple of scares and ended up in the emergency room, and he actually thought he was having some heart attacks, some small heart attacks, and it ended up not being. It was kind of a indigestion or something, but it did scare them, and we talked at that time. We talked about what would happen, and they actually reached out to me to ask me if they needed it, would I be able to fill in? And I was positive about it. We never brought it up again, but in the last 2 years, especially the last year, I could tell that he was not feeling good. He was not quite as sharp as he had been. And I could tell that. And so for the last about 18 months, when we'd get together, I would ask him, I said, what's your plan? What's your succession plan? And it was funny. He would say, I'm just gonna ride it into the sunset. I'm just gonna ride it into the sunset. And I think he didn't want to face the fact that he wasn't feeling as good as
Yeah.
as good as he let on. And you have these times of whatever denial and different things, and so it's just, and it may be that he was confident that when that day came, I would say yes, and so he just didn't worry about it, and didn't want to talk about it. I don't know, but anyway, what is really amazing to me is that our backgrounds were so similar. He grew up on this farm. I grew up on a farm. His dad was a bit of a eccentric genius. My dad was a bit of an eccentric genius.
Mm-hmm.
His dad never made a living from the farm. My dad never made a living from the farm. He grew up, he started as a child, 10, 11, 12 years old, selling stuff, selling produce and different things. And I started at 10 years old with my chickens, selling eggs and being an entrepreneur. In high school, he started working at the local newspaper. And in high school, I started working at the local newspaper. And in college, he started, working at an ad agency. I didn't do that in college, but when I came home, I would work at the local newspaper. And so the point is that we had this very, very parallel entrepreneurial, genius, eccentric dad, business oriented, journalistic thing going on as extremely young boys, young men. And he was 10 years older than I am, but our lives paralleled through there. And I think a lot of that similarity was why we got on so well. We just had so much in common that when we got together, it was very, very precious.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I suppose there's a lot of parallels between what you've just gone through and what you would discuss or encourage through your book, The Fields of Farmers, which is a great piece where you're saying, be prepared.
Yes.
In life there is death, and there are transitions.
Yes.
There are disabilities that occur. There's all sorts of things that happen in life. So at least get the conversation going and get things prepared so that, because you don't necessarily know when things will happen. Sometimes it works like that. You set a date and that's when things happen. But sometimes, well, you're on the train that you don't know is your last.
Right. That's right. Or you're cutting the tree that you don't know is your last.
Yeah.
From accidents to physical issues, there are these things, and so yes, I think that this whole succession thing is a big deal. So right now, here I am, 15 months into this. I mean, I feel great, but I'm already thinking about the magazine now, and looking at all the different departments that we have in advertising. Sally, she has a lieutenant understudy that she now says if she died tomorrow, it would be seamless. Okay, we've got advertising set. Glenda is training a bookkeeper, a business manager under her. It looks like that part is seamless. So now I'm looking at the editorial. Oh no, here I'm the weak link. and so I'm starting to actively think and have discussions with people I encounter to try to discover, I need my, Alan had me. Well, I need my me, out there somewhere.
Yeah. Yes. So you're already got that in your mind, just as you have at the farm, and you're one of the great examples, I think, that I've seen of where you've had a really great transition between the generations from your own parents to yourself, and now to Daniel and Sherry. There's a lot of lessons in all of that, and I think it's also important too. One of the notes I just took there while you were speaking was how didactic all of this is. And it seems like a lot of the people in the Stockman Grass Farmer organisation have that capability to switch roles. It's again very similar to the kind of thing that you've developed at Polyface within your own team there, within your family.
Yes.
Everyone
Yes.
can
Well,
pick up a piece when
yes.
as
Well,
opposed to being this, as opposed to having a lot of specialization.
yes, that's correct. Cross training. In fact, I can say for a fact that if I were still doing the heavy lifting here on the farm, I never could have done this. So it was wonderful. It was wonderful that in our own farm business, that succession, as you mentioned, that succession is far enough along, as we say, retiring into the business. It was far enough along that I have the freedom, at this stage in my life, the freedom to be able to say yes to a pretty big ask. I mean, it's not a little deal, and
No, not at
so
all.
to be able to do that, to be able to do that, and I think this is part of, my dad used to always say his goal for every job. He had numerous. He was an accountant, bookkeeper, and made his life in figures, and his goal of every single job that he had, and he had several throughout his life, that is to become efficient enough at it, either through efficiency or through through leveraging help, that you turn that 5-day a week thing in, and you get the same amount accomplished in 3 days. And he did that routinely. I watched this happen. He would go in, full-time job, go on a salary, and inevitably within a year or two, he was getting the same pay working 3 days a week. Well, what happened? Well, he figured out efficiencies. He figured out ways to do things. Little cheat, and this was before computers, so it was, his favorite thing was designing kind of crib sheets and efficiency sheets, whether it was a slick filing system or keeping up with inventory. He had a way to keep up with what he was buying. Once he was the head accountant bookkeeper for a big metal fabrication outfit, and of course they're buying screws and welding apparatus, steel, different grades of steel, different grades of aluminum, all sorts of things. And those are commodity prices, and they change all the time. And how do you keep up with them? And of course, today we would use computers, but back then, he developed a wonderful little card catalog where he just had this running total, and he could create his own graphs and to find out for himself, when is aluminum locally available from such and such what's the month that it has the lowest price all the time. And he was able to, to create that, and by himself, he was able to accomplish the same amount of work in 2/3 of the time, which is, a really, really good thing for anybody to aspire to.
I find that really fascinating because, you are a fan of people like George Henderson and his brother Frank and their work. And then I was gifted a couple of years ago a book by Edmund Morris called 10 Acres Enough. And I also read The Founder, which is the book about the McDonald's brothers and Ray Kroc, who who took their business effectively and surreptitiously, as it turned out. But you've got these people who, in the pre-digital era, were ledger people, and things were able to, and patterns were able to jump off the page at them, whereas these days we need an app for that. And I think it's really interesting that people also, do you think that there's something about when you sit down with a piece of paper and that you map out the systems that you have and you break things down? Do you think that there's a superiority to that, or am I speaking as someone who's sort of in between the paper era and the digital era there?
Yeah, well, you if you know me, I'm a
maybe I'm
Luddite,
asking the wrong person this question.
yeah, there's a reason why this is happening audio and not audio visual. I mean, a lot of it is because our internet is so slow here at the farm, but a lot of it too is because I'm just not a very savvy manipulator. You've traveled with me enough to know that I don't even have a smartphone. I'm still on the old flip phone.
That's right. I've seen your typewriter that you carry around with you. It's incredible.
And so I do have my Verizon Jetpack though, you know, so that's cool with the computer. Yeah. So yeah, this whole question of tactile, the importance of tactile. There have been lots of studies now showing that when you write notes in a classroom, your retention is way above if you type them into a laptop computer. There's something about that tactile that does make a difference. But I don't want to get into the debate of, you know, being a whatever anti-technology or whatever. I'm not sure I want to get into that debate. But I just will say that I think that farmers, especially, we are not good at time and motion studies. We don't take it seriously.
No.
We do what we're supposed to do, or what Dad did, or what the neighbors say to do, or what the salesman said to do, and we're not good at actually, whether we use electronics or paper, of putting down side by side time, motion, and margin comparisons to make decisions. We kind of make decisions shooting from the hip. And I remember, I'll give you this example of Dad. Again, you know, the older I get, the smarter he was. And I remember very well, I was maybe, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old. He came to the table one day and he was frustrated. He said, "My time is getting away somewhere. I have a leak on my time, and I don't know where it is, but I'm going to find out." Now, you know, so here's a numbers guy. So what he does, he takes a paper, and he says, I'm going to audit for a week. So he takes a week and he divides his whole day into 5-minute increments, and he notes everything that he does every 5 minutes of the day. Now a lot of times, of course, there are big blocks of time, you know, 3 hours doing this or whatever. But I mean, you know, from brushing your teeth to milking the cow, I mean, 5-minute increments. And I remember, like yesterday, Saturday evening, he comes to the table triumphant. He says, "I found the leak." He said, "I'm spending 7 hours a week reading the newspaper." And the revelation was that's almost a person day a week of work. You know, 7 days a week is, 7 hours a week is almost a whole day. And so he resolved to not read the newspaper anymore. Now, we're news nuts here. That lasted about a month, and then he was back into his old ways. But the more, you know, as I've gotten older and thought about that, I've really come to appreciate that the degree of self-examination and audit to figure it out. You know, whether you decide, well, reading the paper is not as important or not is not the point. The point is to take the time to do the examination of the idea, of the plan, of the thing. We had a very interesting one recently where there are now in the U.S. now there are a couple or three manufacturers of kits for large, like 7 meter by 6, 7. Let's see, 3. I'm trying to convert my feet into meters here.
People, I think you've probably got a lot of US listeners, so that's okay.
We got okay. So say 28 by 40 feet, so 800 square feet big portable pasture poultry kind of hoop structures. There's been some real interesting design to put these together. And there's a couple of companies that are selling them. You can buy the kit and put it together. And they're saying, it's so much more efficient than the little shelters that we use and all this stuff. And recently I was at the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association meeting in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and this big discussion ensued about predators, aerial predators. Of course, ground predators aren't as big a deal, but aerial predators. And finally, one of the fellows that manufactures the kits, he says, "Look, this is a ridiculous discussion. Just get one of our big hoop structures, and you don't have to worry about aerial predators. They're completely enclosed all the time." So a lady came up to me afterwards, and she says, and she was doing like we do, the Millennium Feather Net, which is a kind of a quasi, it's a hybrid, it's an electric net surrounding a portable kind of an A-frame skid structure that's got a roof on it, but it's open to the outside, but the chickens can range out. They're not they're not contained all the time. And she asked me, well, is he right? How do you even begin to make a decision? How do you determine how much predation loss you can have in a more open, free range situation before you have to go to these expensive, a big, expensive, completely self-enclosed system? And so I'm sitting here, yeah, that's a good question. But then I'm thinking, well, beyond that, has anybody taken the time to push a pencil on whether our little 10 by 12 field shelters, a bunch of them compared to the big, field hoop structure, what's the comparison there? And so we sat down and we essentially took these three things. We took the little shelter, the big shelter, and the kind of open free range Millennium Feather Net. We didn't put the Eggmobile in because the Eggmobile concept, it works behind the cows. We don't really recommend it for the commercial egg thing, but the feather net thing where you have more control, you keep the chickens out of the woods and the flower beds and stuff. That's got some
that's where most people are going to be at.
Yeah.
Anyway, the other ones where the animals are a bit old, or the hens are a bit older and they're a bit more robust anyway. So
yes. All right. So anyway, so we have these three things, and well, we've got to figure out what's our labor to move them every day. So we did that, and of course the Millennium Feather Net was best. Interestingly, the little hand shelter, our little individual shelters, was actually a little bit less time than the big structure. And of course, you don't have to start an engine to move it. The big structure, you've got to move with a machine or some sort of a truck or something, which means you're running out through your field and instead of just walking. And then, well, what about the capital cost? We ran a capital cost. The bottom line was we were able to actually come to a 30% predation rate on the open system before you went to an enclosed of either type. And when you went to an enclosed, it was far superior to go to the small shelter, the small hand-moved shelter, and have a bunch of them than it was fewer of these very, very expensive machine-moved structures. And I was actually surprised. I thought that we were going to find something different. And the thing is, you have to do the audit. You have to do the examination. If you don't do the pencil pushing, you're not going to make the right decision because this is what keeps us from making the emotional decision. The truth is, we like the way that looks, or we like the way that feels, or we like the way that salesman talks. Ultimately, we're emotional beings, and we tend to just make these emotional decisions, and those are not the best decisions generally to make. And so being disciplined enough to sit down and actually put the numbers on paper so you can compare protects us from our own emotions, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it isn't. How do you normally, like, if people out there are looking at, as they will, and I've got a question here about you as a start from one of the listeners, you when you started off. So, a lot of people are starting up. A lot of people, and both you and I work with startups all the time. You're out there through your work with Stockman and through your own individual work, talking to new farmers and encouraging new farmers as much as anybody. And how do you recommend that people do that kind of work? Is it best that one person in the organization identifies themselves and says, or one of the couple or a child or whomever in the organization says, oh, well, look, I'll take on that? Or is it something that everyone does? How do you actually do it?
You mean do the financial
do the time and motion stuff. Take that step back so that while you're working in the business, that you're actually working on the business.
Yes. The whole Whitby Watby.
Yeah. Because often they talk about the two being separate moments, but when you're actually doing this sort of thing, I mean, it's real time, both of it.
Yes. Well, I think a couple of things. One is use your watch.
Have a watch.
Time yourself. Time yourself, and you can ask, is there a different way to do this? And I'm a big believer in brainstorming. We don't do real brainstorming sessions, especially in family business, because as soon as one person has an idea, the rest of the family, it's generally their responsibility to shoot it down, right? I mean, that's
well, that's a culture in a family that is cultivated a bit, which I want to talk to you about. But yes,
So the key to actually leveraging all the potential angles that everybody sees it or thinks about something, the way to make sure you capture everybody's angle is to have a brainstorming session and prohibit any judgment on any statement until all the ideas are on the table. That's the only way I know to get everybody's angle on. And I'll tell you, I have been amazed throughout my life how many ideas I don't have. People come and think I'm just full of all these ideas. Well, I've got some good ideas, but generally, I'm just a plagiarizer. I see a good idea over here, and I bring it to the farm, and I see a good idea over here, and I bring it to the farm. And so I think one of the best ways to get to the right, to where we can make the right decision, the right answer, the best procedure, is we have to expose ourselves to more outfits, to more angles, to more things. This is one of my little kind of pet issues with holistic management, which I'm a fan of. I love. Nobody loves holistic management, more than I do, maybe. But the guarantee that if you will do this, it will guarantee the right decision. You can't guarantee that because now you might be able to make the right decision between A, B, C, and D, but if the real answer is G and I don't know about G, I'm not going to get the right answer. And so this is why eclectic.
I was just going to say, I mean, part of that too, I think, in holistic management, before you get to a point about eclecticism, is that they do recommend that you plan assuming that you are wrong when it comes to the environment because of the complexities involved. And I'd add plenty of social complexities when dealing with the
Yes.
human as well, but which probably leads
Sure.
to a comment about eclecticism.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what I'm getting at is that we're often limited by our own exposure, and this is why reading widely or following widely is so important. You know, and you have certainly been a champion of this. That all of these, whether it's you know, keyline, biodynamics, you know, whatever it might be, over time they tend to become almost cultish insular. So many of these things, and we have to push ourselves out of our myopia and create additional exposure, and we'll meet up with ideas that we dismiss out of hand. That's ridiculous, but we'll meet up with others that are really, really super. And so getting more tools in our box, I think, is one of the most critical things we can do. And again, we farmers, we tend to not want to get out very much. You know, we want to just get out there, get away from people and do our thing. And so this is not an activity that farmers tend to really encourage. Alan Nation used to always say, the best investment any farmer can ever make is in information. Now that was easy for him to say. He was in the information business.
Sure.
But I think that in general, that is a profound statement. That, I mean, we think of it investing in what, soil health, or investing in cattle, or investing in whatever, but the idea of investing in information so that we can have more tools in our box, more ideas to be able to determine where might I make a change to attack a weak link. I think for me, I would tend to agree with that information doesn't let you down.
And I suppose the big thing in that, though, is what you do with it and how, because we're in an era right now, an absolutely unprecedented era, I'd suggest, of information availability and transfer. You know, the fact that we're just doing what we're doing right now is incredible, and that it's able to be syndicated, you know, the syndication of information, and as well as its distribution. What about the principles through which, or the filters through which, and that sort of feeds into some of my questions that I would have with you about the culture of place and the culture of thinking and some of those parameters. Now I know with you, you've grown up in a strong Christian family, so there's that's been brought to bear, and the teachings of the Bible, and your own parents and their parents' influences there. You've, as you and your wife, Teresa, as being the leaders of your family, what sort of principles do you bring to this so that you can take all of this information and strip it apart and see that it works or not, or does it really come back to this testing again?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah, I mean, we certainly all have our biases. What we don't want to have is prejudice. Prejudice means prejudge. Bias is simply your worldview, how you view things. Do you tend toward, for example, a God or no God? Do you tend toward bigger government or smaller government? Do you tend toward children, a heavy disciplining, guiding hand on children, or a more, hands off, let them go play in the traffic kind of thing? And there are these kinds of things, and yeah, you're right. These kinds of biases certainly do, affect how we view things. I would say that our biases here, yeah, they do affect. We have a bias toward, do-it-yourselfism. In other words, we appreciate dependency on others, but we also don't want to be feel entitled or victims, or what can we do? What can we do for ourselves, and can we do it for ourselves first? That kind of bias. We also have kind of a bias that I would say, I don't want to say anti-technology because that's too broad, but we have I think a healthy skepticism that technology in and of itself is the answer, and we have a real healthy respect for patterns and templates in nature that have been used throughout history. Obviously, the pattern of animal movement, the pattern of animals on healthy ecologies, the patterns of multi-speciation and symbiotic complex relationships. And that bias tends to make us, I think, far more questioning as soon as somebody comes up with GMOs or nanotechnology, or we can now have factory farms without the negatives. I mean, any of those kinds of promises, we're pretty skeptical about. I think more skeptical than if you didn't have any of the kind of biases that we have.
Well, it's kind of like right now. One of the things, just to throw it out there, I mean, you imagine back in the 1940s and 50s, electric fencing, as we now know it, came onto the scene. And I know, talking to my grandparents, that they were pretty skeptical of it, and ultimately they used it. But now we've got virtual fencing, and people have been using that for years with their dogs, with their pets. But now we're talking about doing it with cattle. Forms of livestock, and it's sort of that to me is going to be just one of many examples that we're going to face, where people are going to face that down. It's a different thing to a GMO in a sense, but it's one of those technologies that we're going to be looking at, and people are going to go, yeah, I think I'll stick with the electric fence, which in itself 50 years ago was an innovation.
Sure. And to be sure, many of these technologies are introduced in not perfect working order. It's a development in progress, and so I can assure you, the electric
cows running down the lane because the GPS had a cloud in front of it or something.
Right. So that's and certainly different areas, different. I'm familiar with the whole transponder idea. You hang around every cow, and when she gets close to the GPS boundary, it beeps, and then of course it shocks her if she gets too close, and pretty soon those cows learn to listen to those little beep beep beeps, and can be contained. And so the idea of sitting down at your computer module and moving your mouse around to move a herd of 1,000 cows around is Star Trek-ish. But the other bias we have is, does this thing, whatever this thing is, does it actually does it massage an ancient pattern of success? And so in this respect, an easier and cheaper way to mimic the migratory choreography of herbivores, for example, would be a technology that I would embrace pretty quickly. That's not the case in, for example, having little molecular-sized capsules running through my blood vessels. That's pretty new, strange stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, these filters and biases, they're philosophical, they're familial, you know, they're what you grow up with, what did you embrace, what you didn't embrace. And again, I would say, you know, exposing ourselves. I'm convinced. I do an interesting question. You know, if I get into a group, I did this when we started homeschooling our kids back in the early days, and the truancy officers would come in and take your kids out of the home and put them in foster care. You know, if you were homeschooling your kids. And whenever I would encounter a teacher or some academia, you know, person in the school system, I would ask them. I've got a shelf full of those early homeschooling books. You know, when it was being introduced, and there were conservatives and liberals and all sorts of different kinds of ways to do homeschooling, what to do, how to do. And I would just ask the school superintendent or a principal or a teacher. I'd say, "Have you ever heard of, you know, so and so?" It would be like walking up to somebody at Monsanto and asking them, "Have you ever heard of Sir Albert Howard?" And you know what? They never have.
No.
They never do. And you know, they accuse us of being us because we have compost and don't use chemicals and all. They accuse us of being very, you know, narrow-minded and whatever, backwards and whatever. And yet that other side tends to not even be aware or expose itself to this other view. And that's why I say, you know, one of the secrets of success, I think, is this exposure. You know, you could call it information. I think your point of information is well taken. The problem is that most of us are only taking information that agrees with us. And so we can become very, very well informed about my position, but I'm not well informed about the other position.
Yeah.
If I'm and so when I say maybe I should, when I am thinking this way, I'm always using the word eclectic because I find, well, I like to read people that agree with me too. You know? But when I really grow in my thinking and in my development, it's when I'm reading someone who's challenging my assumptions, and that takes work to expose ourselves and really carefully look at the person that's kind of challenging us.
Yes, I was listening to someone recently, and they said when Adam and Eve opened their eyes, they immediately became self-conscious, and that's something that we all have within us, and so and you put this across all people. You know, the people who want to work at Monsanto don't want to be exposed. You don't want to be exposed, but it's sort of necessary, isn't it, to go and see what other people are doing and be challenged and expose yourself a little bit by doing so.
Yes, absolutely. Which, you know, if you mentioned George Henderson a little while ago, the wonderful British fellow that wrote Farming Ladder. He's certainly one of my. I never met him, but he's certainly one of my heroes. And
his wife is still alive, evidently.
Yeah, yeah. But he made a point of visiting farms, and he would take his vacation. He didn't, of course, they didn't have Disney World back then, but he didn't go to Disney World, and there again, time to be able to do this. You know, I've never been to Disney World. I have no desire to go. If I had the time to go to Disney World, I'd rather go visit 3 or 4 farms and see what they're doing, talk to them, and that's why pasture walks are important. That's why, you know, the whole this mastermind, you know, the business. If you read Business Community at all, the whole mastermind concept of meeting, you know, monthly or some sort of routine with people who are at or above your level in what you're doing, and that lifts the boats. It moves us ahead.
Yeah, coming to some of your questions. which is where I suppose I'm getting. I've looked at all of these questions that both of us have put down, and I've looked at some of yours, like what's holding us back from more widespread adoption of these practices. How do you generate more salaries on a piece of land? How do you get and keep good labour? I mean, I look at those three questions as being very in sync with what we've just been talking about for the last half an hour or so. That when I look at how do you get and keep a good team around you, how do you make that invigorating? How do you? I know you spend a bit of time on this when we've worked together. You try and get people to identify the kinds of roles that they are, and you could go a bit deeper than that, where some people are saying, as I know, they're doing personality assessments and all of that sort of thing as a precursor to that. Doing those jobs that you love, but then feeling like you're being nourished as a result. Could you speak a little bit to that and those questions that you've put down?
Well, sure. Well, let me just say off the top that I've come to the conclusion, and you can call this a bias, you can call it experience, wisdom, however you want to label it. But I've come to the conclusion that until a farm or a business has two salaries from two different generations, it's not sustainable or regenerative. And that hits some people as pretty prejudicial.
Well, I think the regenerative part of that makes sense, especially if that was to step out over 3 generations, because to me that's really showing, because you've got that as they say, the first generation makes it, the second generation builds it even further, and then the third generation breaks it. Right.
So yeah, but certainly minimally, because of the cycle of life and because mortality is true. If we have a farm or a business that is simply following our trajectory of life, in your 20s you have unbounded energy, but you have no wisdom or experience. In your 30s, they start to even out. In your 40s, you still have some energy, and now you're really getting some experience. And by the time you really get the experience, you have no energy. And so this is kind of this is the cycle of life. And so if you're going to have continuity of a business, continuity on the land, and we see this through tribalism. Study any primitive tribe. It's the matriarch and patriarch who has the experience. They know, I remember when we had this drought and there was still water, on the backside of the hill, toward the North Star, whatever. But that's where this experience comes from, and so leveraging the elder experience on youthful energy has always been tribally. It's always been the way tribes and families have created continuity and indeed equity. And I don't mean just equity in money. I mean equity in knowledge of place, adaptability to place, resiliency in place. It's the leveraging of the experience with the youthful enthusiasm that ensures both of those. If all you have is experience, you don't have enough energy to move where the trees are blocking the blizzard. And if all you have is youthfulness, you don't know, you got plenty of energy to move, you just don't know where to go. And so I think that's a beautiful thing. And interestingly, in the Stockman Grass Farmer schools, we have now, the 3 schools that I do a pork school, a marketing school, and a business school. And all 3 of these schools, I've brought on a much younger sidekick, basically a generation younger, and these schools I'm finding are just dynamite, rather than rather than just me doing things myself, having the younger generation and they see things differently, they do things differently, they explain things differently, and it just really enriches the whole experience having the two generations there. Now, when you say that to many farmers, they'll say, well, good grief, I'm already working 100 hours a week. How in the world am I going to generate two salaries? And so that's where then you start down to people skills, finding your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and bringing on partners, not employees necessarily, but partners who can, who will fit and complement where you are. And I haven't been on a single farm in the world that is fully leveraged to its potential. You've probably been on as many or maybe more farms than I've been, and I would put money that you would agree with me that there's not a place on the planet that where the people on that particular piece of land have caressed out of the resource base all the abundance that it would like to give us.
I think the biggest challenge that I keep coming up on with here, Joel, and I know you would as well, is equity. And I've got a number of clients that I'm dealing with that all of the time. They've got amazing enterprises. They're doing a lot of the things that we're talking about. But when it comes to, a wise old guy that I met in Canada years ago said to me, my grandparents didn't move from Russia to here to lease land. And it's a really big issue, I think, that still carries, especially those of us who are in the so-called new world, that we don't want to go down the pathway of what we actually left behind, and that is feudalism, and that people still want to have their own land. But we've got this issue now where land prices are so expensive. Are we going to have to change the way we think about that, or are we going to have to do another thing, which I think about a lot, where land, the ability for us to own land immediately is going to have to perhaps take a bit of a breather in order for us to actually set up enterprises. So you run an enterprise as a separate entity to a landscape, as it were, if that makes sense. Because for you to go and buy a block of land for $20,000 an acre, or some of the ridiculous prices that are out there now, and try and borrow money to buy that, unless you've got a really wealthy parent or an endowment, is just not going to be feasible.
Yes. Well, you know what? I have a couple of. I agree with you 100%. I mean, my quick soundbite on this was when Mom and Dad bought this farm in 1961. It was $90 an acre, and feeder calves were selling for $30 a hundredweight. Today, the land is $7,000 an acre, and those feeder calves are selling for $1.20. So the land went up 32 times, calves went up 4 times, and there's no more sun and no more rain and no more soil. I mean, no more, there's no more, nobody sprinkled extra fertility here during that period of time.
If anything, the land base has gone backwards under a lot of management since then. So
yes, under most schemes. And so what we have now is a complete divorcement. It's a divorcement of land value to production value versus what it was 50 or 60 years ago, when you could actually buy land and pay for it with the production from that land. So it does bring us to this whole Stephen Covey question of what you can control and what you can't. And so our context has changed from what's within our control to what's beyond our control. And of course, as Stephen Covey says in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you've got to concentrate on what you can control. So you and I cannot control the market price of farmland.
No.
It is what it is. There's nothing we can do about what that is now. What we can control is how we respond to that new reality. And so Alan Nation always said, he said, buying land should be done with after-tax dollars. Owning land is financially defensive. Managing land is financially offensive. And so without getting into, well, I mean, this is such a big discussion because it moves you into, should people even own land? I mean, that's a valid question. What happened when we drew it up? I mean, in ancient times, I mean, take the Bible. The Israelites had to give it all back to the original owners every 50 years in the year of Jubilee. I don't think that actually ever happened, but
I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen in Israel right now. Just we'll put that to one side.
But I don't want to. That's such a big and emotional issue. I don't want to go there. But I do think it's important for us to appreciate there's a time to acquire financial equity and a way to get there, and a time to invest that equity in other places. And so as managers, I'm not going to use the word farmers because farmers indicates land ownership. So I'm going to say as land managers, it's incumbent upon us to appreciate that the rules of our game, I love that's the phrase that you like to use. The rules of our game have changed in the last 60 years. And so we need to appreciate that in that amount of time, what's happening today is that renting land is becoming much easier because so much land is absentee owned. It's owned by city people. It's owned by other interests. And so the ease of renting land has actually become much easier now than it was 50 or 60 years ago.
Yeah. And ultimately, therefore, and this is what I've seen with a number of producers over the years, that share farming or leasing land is ultimately a more profitable enterprise because the costs of, so if you were to borrow money to buy land and then you're having to pay that back, which most people are doing, and that's a part of the cost of your enterprise, versus the cost of accessing that land, the cost of accessing it is usually much cheaper. So the other point I suppose I'd make, and I'm having this conversation all the time with quite a number of clients, and I'm thinking of one couple who you know as well. I won't mention their name as on air, but this is a really big challenge for them. They've got an amazing enterprise by anyone's reckoning. I would think it's a very attractive enterprise to work in. Is this idea of portability with enterprises, Joel? Is that something that you've seen where, I'll park out of this discussion the use of, because some people are, talking about, well, how do you do all of this if you're a tree farmer? If you're growing orchard crops or that sort of thing, you can't take your enterprise with you, but you can take a lot of their enterprises that you're talking about with you. There is a portability to a lot of the kind of enterprises that you have, say, at Polyface, and that people have copied or adapted from Polyface, isn't there? You can have a going concern that you can take. The land benefits, no problem. And you can go and start up somewhere else as you would need to with comparative ease, as compared to, say, if you're a conventional chicken farmer, well, you can't just go and take your big sheds with you. You have to go and do the whole thing again.
That's correct. And in fact, we own some land, obviously, but we also now lease 10, 10 properties in the area, and all of these we're able to duplicate pretty much what we've done here on our own land, because our infrastructure is mobile, and it's also modular. So I'm a big believer in modular infrastructure that allows you to grow, to scale. You can scale up, you can scale back, because it's modular. The infrastructure actually doesn't add a tremendous amount to your capitalization cost. In America right now, the average is $4 in capital infrastructure. This is not land. This is just machinery and buildings. $4 in capital infrastructure per $1 in annual gross sales. So if your farm is grossing $100,000, you'll have $400,000 in machinery and buildings. Our ratio here is 50 cents of capitalization to $1. That's an 800% shift in in capitalization cost. That, and the beauty of then having the modular mobile infrastructure is that we can then literally we call it moving the farm, because a farm is a farm because what a farmer is doing to it. And absent the farmer, you don't have a farm. You have a piece of land, but it's not a farm anymore. And so we try to use our words carefully and say it's a piece of property, and it becomes a farm when a farmer moves on to it. And if the farmer's farm is completely mobile and modular, that farm can be placed on any piece of land on which it fits. And that's a pretty freeing paradigm. Now, does it work for every single thing? You mentioned trees, orchard, vineyard. Does it work for every single thing? No, it doesn't. But even in those places, a lot of times a mobile modular livestock enterprise could be built with the orchard, with the vineyard, to mow or to fertilize, to keep, that would add another salary onto that land base, so that now both parties, both entities, could have a second pair of hands on the days it's necessary or conducive to have a second pair of hands to do things. You're holding up you're building a fence, holding up a board on a fence. It's hard to do that. I mean, there are tricks to it, but it's hard to do. But a second pair of hands can mean 1 + 1 = 3 in efficiency. And so thinking in terms of abundance rather than scarcity, which is another one of the Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think is critical. So many farmers, we view our land base as scarce. We only have so much soil, have so much water. We only have so many degree days a year, blah, 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 blah. And always thinking in terms of what I can't do, what is limited, and what is scarce, as opposed to flipping that around and appreciating the abundance that can be caressed out of that in our context. We're hardwired for negative and not positive. That's why we call them stoplights and not go lights. Nobody comes back from town and says, "Hey, honey, I hit 6 go lights in town today."
Indeed. So, got a few questions from other people just that I should respect. Joel, I think, who by that name, João Pedro Joncalves, I think it looks like a Portuguese name. The first 3 years of Salatin's at Polyface farm, what successes and failures at the farm during those days in terms of grass and soil recovery? I'll just paraphrase that a little. So I suppose the question there is, Joel, is those first few years that you were there, which was when you were quite young, what were the big successes and failures that you and your parents would have seen, your brother would have seen, and sisters?
Yeah. Well, if we go way clear right back to the very beginning, um, uh, there were a couple of big ones. The biggest failure probably was Dad had this idea to sell pulpwood. And so he bought a truck and took the bed off and built a different kind of system. Anyway, bottom line was he hauled one load and realized there was no money in it. And he'd already put a fair amount of money in this truck, which we used then for other things. But I think that got his attention early on, and he was very smart. I think the thing that was our biggest success right there early on was protecting the woodland. We actually built fence and protected the woodland. We had atrocious gullies. About the first 10 years we were here, every spring we would actually plant, 5,000 trees. And we ended up reforesting about 60 acres that was open. So when we came, the farm was sold as 160 acres open. And within 10 years, it was only 100 acres open. And that conservation effort, fencing the cows off of the very steep hillsides that had these gullies on them, planting trees on them, arrested the erosion. I think the biggest success we had early on was simply what I call stopping the hemorrhaging. And Dad was very clever at, putting branches down in the bottom of a gully, or even going up and picking up some rocks and making a little 18-inch high, rock permeable dam to slow the water down. And in no time, you'd have a terrace. The terrace would then grow grass, and then you'd see a little sapling come in the terrace of, and it was transformative to just as a child see on a small scale what a little bit of effort to stop the hemorrhaging could actually accomplish. And so those are some of our big successes. He started with electric fence early on, and of course the fence was sheep, and that was a failure. The fencing at that time in 1962 and 3, the electric fencing was not powerful enough and consistent enough to actually hold sheep, and we had lots of problems with that.
It's still hard with
cattle. Yeah. What?
I said it's still hard with sheep.
Yeah, it's still harder with sheep than with cows. But now we have the really hot energizers in there, and you can be pretty sure when you walk away from it, it'll still be working tomorrow when you come back. Exactly. And so we've as the Virginia Slims cigarette commercial is, we've come a long way, baby. So that's really changed. So I remember very well the early frustrations of those early years with the sheep, and the frustration with that whole logging thing, and that definitely didn't last long. But once we got through that, it was pretty cool. There were some other interesting things. We always milked a couple of cows, so we had extra milk, and he found out how much veal calves would sell for. We'll just sell our milk through veal calves, and so he built a portable veal calf shelter that we could put 2, 4, 6, 8. It had 4 quadrants in it. We could put 2 calves, and so the way we milked was we'd bring the cow up and open the door to the veal shelter, and the calves would jump out and they would nurse. And by the time you hooked up the 4th cow on the 4th corner, the first one would be done. They'd go back in, the cow would go back to graze, and we just moved this around the field. The biggest thing that happened early on, I was little. I was 7, 8 years old. We took a Sunday drive somewhere, And Dad, we visited a farm. Here again, we're back to the eclectic visit farms. He visited a farm that was using mobile infrastructure. I don't know yet. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was chickens, pigs, sheep. I don't know what it was. But I remember his just almost levitation of enthusiasm coming home about this idea of mobile infrastructure. And from that day on, he completely devoted us and the farm to mobile infrastructure. Yeah, he built we built a 50-foot by 20-foot mobile cattle shelter and got it operational. That was 1969, so that was just 8 years after we got here. We had a the big fully functional cattle shelter, like a mobile shade tree, and that was instrumental in moving around our fertility, so we didn't lose it under any trees. We got it. We were able to take it out on a patch of brambles or thistles or whatever, and get our fertility right. We could literally tell those cows, we want your toilet area right here today.
Yeah.
And it was really a critical part of our early fertility program.
So I've got a couple of other points here. One is, I think these two are related. One's from Stephen Bublitz. Great point. This was much earlier. Can you give a couple of examples of new ideas that you're trying out and recently successful ideas? I might just park that one for a moment. The other one's from Ricky Thomas. Hi, Ricky. Ricky's a friend of ours. He's at Sterling College and in Vermont, and he runs some of the sustainable agriculture work there and teaches graduates or undergraduates animal power systems there, which are fascinating. Joel mentioned that he had completed a recent audit of his pastured poultry operation and found that hand-pulled tractors for broilers ranked highly on his efficiency scale. I'd like to hear more about that audit. I think you might have elaborated on that sufficiently there. Joel, unless you've got anything to add that you don't think you put down.
No, I think that broilers are high on the efficiency scale.
No, the different types of you were comparing earlier the various types and scales.
Yes, that was The only thing I would add is that was not done with broilers. That was done with layers.
Right.
I did not do that analysis because we don't run the broilers in an open system. So predation is not a problem with broilers.
Yeah.
So that analysis was done strictly with layers, not broilers.
Yeah, gotcha. And this is from Michelle Russell Christopher. Joel experienced an unwanted move this past year and was trying to buy the land. Please ask him to tell us how that ended up. You might well know about it.
Yeah. That actually is a great example of what we've just been dealing with on price of land.
Yeah.
This was our biggest leased farm.
Mm-hmm.
It's 440 acres and 360 acres of pasture. It's 25% of our pasture, of our grass.
Yeah.
Now the pigs and the chickens, the omnivores, we can consolidate them a little bit and bring them in tighter. And if we lose that farm, it's okay. But for the cows, where we're dependent on the grass, because it's all grass. We're very dependent on that pasture. And what happened there was we leased it 10 years ago from mom and dad. In the 10 years, mom and dad have both died, and the 4 children have now inherited it, and they've decided that they want to sell it. And so it went on the market in October of 2016. So we're now into the second year of it being on the market. And so our first thought was, well, is there a patron saint out there, that would want to buy this? And in fact, the 4 children who inherited it, this has been their desire. I mean, they like us. They're not selling it because they don't like us. They're selling it because they can't agree on what to do with it.
Yes.
And so So to keep peace in the family, they've decided they needed to move it. And so we started, putting some hooks around there and some feelers. And one of our friends and customers is a pretty wealthy, a very wealthy fella, an entrepreneur. And he was interested, we looked at it, he looked at it with me. And he said, one of the reasons these people that are wealthy entrepreneurs, is the reason they've gotten there is because they're smart. And he said to me, he said, I want you to do something. I want you to put down on paper what a Polyface fill up of that piece of property would look like. Just use your imagination and fill it up. And so I'd never done that before. So I came home and I sat down and we started brainstorming, so many cows, so many broilers, so many eggs, so many pigs, rabbits, honeybees, vegetable gardens, flower garden, a little vineyard, a little bit of orchard, some agritourism, a couple of cottages, some ecotourism. Anyway, you get where
Sure.
the ideal, the whole permaculture stacking. What all can we stack on here? And you know what? It came up to $5 million a year. And suddenly it dawned on me, well, goodness, if we could actually do that, this whole $7,000 an acre land cost is nothing. If you actually filled it up, you could buy the land.
Yeah.
And the light bulb went off in my head, and I realized, goodness, our weak link, even in the context that we have, our weak link is maybe not even the land price. It's two things. It's creativity, and it's people, which then moves us to the weak link of relationships, and how do we massage our relationships? And the third thing is marketing.
Yeah.
If we could market it all, and we had the people to do it, and we have the financial to the capital to move it forward, suddenly even expensive land could be bought and paid for. So it was pretty epiphanal for me to go through the exercise and kind of learn something about my own prejudices.
Yeah, and that, like you say, the rubber hits the road on that, of course, and you have to deal with people in particular and getting that. And that works at two ends, not only the team who was running it, but also having people support it. The people, some people call them the eaters, the consumers, actually supporting and giving you that $5 million.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'll move on.
But Darren, the truth is there are lots of people with that kind of money out there. I mean, when you look at Hollywood, and you look at the entertainment industry, you look at the recreational and Caribbean cruises and whatever, and just Silicon Valley and Mark Zuckerberg and Warren Buffett. I mean, when you look at people out there that literally have billions of dollars, I don't know. It's frustrating. It's frustrating when you see a project like this that's so possible and doable, and you see all of this money and what it gets spent on, and you realize, as civilization, we have a really funny set of values.
Yeah. Well, I think too, a lot of those high net worth individuals have seen cowspiracy, but they haven't seen polyfaces too, Joel. So they're setting up livestock sanctuaries and all of that sort of thing. But let's not get started on that.
Yeah, it's easier to get money for a cow nursing home than it is for a cow nursery.
Incredible. So this is from Kelsey Sneed. Actually, I'll just make a point from Bob Reckner, because that's been here for a while. He said, this goes way back, I see the key is to answering the right questions and wonder about them. That's the underlying benefit of brainstorming. The information that leads to improvements comes as a result of asking new questions, not the other way around. How many times in the last hour, and I'd say now the last hour and a half, have I heard one of you say, that's a really good question? Yes, well, indeed, Bob. That's what we'll often find ourselves asking. This is from Kelsey Sneed. Hi, Joel. Former businesswoman turned beginner farmer here. We are so excited, and I'm worried we are starting too much. We are starting too much at one time. Oh goodness, haven't I had this conversation before? Broilers, layers, Berkshires, bees, fresh cut flowers, etc. My goodness. Do you suggest doing a little bit of everything starting out, or should we find a focus and hit it hard? We don't know anything other than what we have been reading. We read a lot, so the learning curve is so steep. We want to succeed. That's a great question, and it ties into some of those that we put for ourselves too, Joel. So
sure, yeah. Well, it is a great question.
I deal with this one. Innovation is so expensive, and
yes.
Anyway, I'll let you go.
You hit the nail on the head. You cannot afford to innovate in every facet of your business. You'll go bankrupt if you're innovating in every facet. And I don't mean that you never refine and tweak and but you have to have stable, mature enterprises in order to fund the immature, new, innovative enterprises. And so I would never say just do one thing first. I think 2 or 3 things is fine. But
depending on your scale and scope, of course.
Yes. But generally, 2 or 3 new things are plenty to get started. I mean, I'm looking at our own farm. Look, we had grass, so it was an obvious thing to have cows. That was obvious, or at least an herbivore. I was told about sheep. We finally graduated to cows, and that was valuable. But when I look at just the innovation on the cows, I mean, there was the whole fencing thing, the portable fencing, and then of course, if you're going to move them, you have the whole water thing. And so we had different things from hauling water to little hand pumps, and then eventually the gravity system that we use today with all the 8 miles of buried water lines. So you have the water, and then you have the fertility, the shade mobile that Dad developed there early on. So those were, and then as after he died, then I developed the pigerators with the composting and the chipping and all the big scale composting using pigs with the gates, the boxes that would move up and down in the hay feeding shed. Those right there were, that was a tremendous amount of innovation, and it essentially occupied our attention for the first several years, and then we once I got to be a teenager there in the early 70s, we'd already been here 10 years. Then I added chickens, and we Dad put his creative modular mobile thing on that, and developed the portable chicken shelter, and I had these layers through teen years. So we didn't add pigs. We didn't add pigs until like 25 years later, when the composting got to be so big, and I realized, well, pigs could do that. And so we added the pigs as a way to do that instead of using machinery. And so we have added methodically, but it's been gradual, methodical. And I think that is a more stable way of making progress than trying to just jump into all the ponds at once. It's just too
The
it's too
creation of
scattered.
the creation of a menagerie
Yeah.
is complex, and if you're not familiar with, especially if you haven't come from land or from a farming background, it's hard enough if you have, but it certainly is even harder if you haven't.
Yes.
Taking aside some of the other prejudices that are there, but I've found myself, I do find myself in my, coaching, mentoring with clients all of the time. In the first 4, 5, 6 years of our operation is trying to, because a lot of people who come into this, especially those who come into this, not necessarily those who started off as farmers, are naturally innovator types, and
Yes.
trying to quell that, trying to bottle that genie a little bit, and have it, like, one of the ways that I've dealt with it is, so, all right, well, just stick with growing your pigs. Maybe use your innovation, or maybe direct your innovation genie to innovation on bookkeeping or innovation on marketing or something, so that you do the whole pig thing better, as opposed to going and taking on another species altogether with all of the complexities that adds. Do you think that's kind of reasonable, Joel, that sort of approach?
Yes, I do. And I deeply appreciate that you said put your attention perhaps on bookkeeping. What I see typically is too much enthusiasm, wanting to do everything at once and not doing well at anything. But then, for example, bookkeeping, time and motion studies, the actual self-evaluation of the enterprise, being unable to even 2 or 3 years in to determine which enterprise is actually making us money, which is not. What are the changes that we can make because we're just into this. Peter Drucker, the business guru, he had the Peter Drucker business curve, which was in the 3 to 5 year range. He said, no business is profitable in the first year. It takes about 3 years. You go through this slow of despond. He's the one who developed this kind of learning curve thing where it gets worse before it gets better. And the fact is that you can't Google experience.
No.
Everybody wants to, but you can't Google experience. And Alan Nation, in his book posthumously, that his widow Carolyn put together from his notes. It was 90% written when he died, and she finished it and published it. It's a wonderful book. But he uses the word in there that we don't hear much. It's the word the slog, SLOG, the slog. We don't like to think about slogging, but the truth is, when you're developing mastery, you have to go through the slog with enough repetitions. Michael Jordan, the fabulous basketball star icon, he used to, in his biography, he says that every basket he scores in a game is represented by 10,000 misses during practice. And that takes time. You can't speed that up. You can't speed up those repetitions. And mastery requires repetitions. I tell people I can teach a person how to gut a chicken in about 15 minutes. It's not a problem. But you don't become a master until you've gutted an old one and a young one, a big one and a small one, on a hot day and a cold day, one with a full crop and an empty crop. All these nuances, that's where you develop mastery, and that only comes with repetition. So, I
find it interesting because a lot of people, I talked with one client years ago. I turned up to his property, and his wife they're very opposite characters, and the wife is, the bookkeeper and the monitor and, that sort of person, and he's the innovator. And I turned up and she rolled her eyes and said, oh, he's got pigs. And they already had a pastured poultry system, the pastured broilers. And she rolled her eyes and said, oh, he's got bloody pigs. And I said, oh, has he? And I went down to look at it, and it wasn't a good system. And I said to him, look, let's get rid of them because you're obviously spreading your energy too far here, and you're not doing either of your operations well now as well as you could, which he agreed on. And anyway, we went back inside, and he said, all right, Daz, if you were me, what would you do? You know, how would 2016 roll out for you? And I said, well, if I were you, I'd make the year that this 2016, the year that farming became boring. And what I meant by that, when I talked that through, I said, well, look, you know, there's going to be a mundanity that is which is an anathema to an innovator that comes from you know, throwing those 10,000 hoops, right? It's just part of the deal.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
There's going to be a mundanity, which is, like I said, is really hard for an innovator. But I said to him, you know, acknowledging that and realizing that will be the case, look at, again, focusing your innovation on doing better monitoring. Because when I said, you know, well, how much time does it take to do this? How much time does he didn't have the answers, or they didn't have quite the answers there. I said, well, that's where you need to focus, because that's when you peel the onion, it's sort of like, all right, well, there's where some of the weak links are here. And we really need to focus your energy and enthusiasm on that and feed your innovation need. And of course they did that, although it was quite funny coming towards the end of that year. He wrote to me and said, I'm really looking forward to 2017. And I said, oh.
Yeah. You know, the Warren Buffett, the, you know, billionaire Berkshire Hathaway guy, Warren Buffett says, he says, put all your eggs in one basket and then watch the basket. And what he was saying there was a kind of permutation of the theme of know what your centerpiece is.
Yes.
Again, Alan Nation always said, never risk the centerpiece, the mothership. And the problem is,
well, know what it is to start with.
Yeah, and yes, exactly. You've got to know what it is. Know what really butters your bread.
Yeah.
And once you determine what really butters your bread, take that as far as you can, as efficient, as profitable as you can, and then hang your other enterprises synergistically around it, not competitively around it. Like, for example, you mentioned the lady that was trying to put her menagerie together way too fast. One of the things that I encourage people to do is do a cash flow chart and a labor flow chart. So you take your year, January through December, and chart how your cash flow is going, and then chart where your labor flow is going. And it'll be, you know, it'll have a peak and a valley, and there'll be down times and high times. And as you're putting together your whole farm program, you're looking to add things where your labor is low and your cash flow is low. You don't want to add things where your cash flow is already high and your labor is already high. No. And by the way, if your labor is high when your cash flow is low, that should be a red flag to tell you that something is wrong. And so what you're trying to do is spruce up the valleys. I call it the shoulders of your flow. Spruce up your shoulders. So think specifically about enterprises that will create cash and create labor during those low times to even out your flow. And that's one of the single quickest and most efficient ways to actually attract partners to your operation is in having this nice continuous cash flow and workflow.
Well, it's an evidence, and it's telling. And these principles cross over into pretty well any type of enterprise. It's not necessarily
absolutely.
Right. So I'd just add to that too, Kelsey, that I think it's really important that you get out and see other enterprises. And I know I think it's really valuable. I don't know where you are, but if you're in the US, then going along to one of Polyface's discovery programs or anything that's similar, so that you can scratch and smell and see just how much is involved, and ask the serious questions about time and motion and all of that Joel's put forward. I think that's really important. This question's from Ulrika. We've just got a few minutes to go, so I'm not going to be able to get through everyone's, but Ulrika has been sitting here for a while. Can Joel comment on whether or not he thinks he would be able to score the same deals and partnerships to leverage his enterprises if he was not an author and hadn't been featured in Michael Pollan's book and talks?
Oh, I'll tell you, Darren, this is one of the most frustrating questions for me because what people need to understand is that when we started, Teresa and I, on Dad and Mom paid for the land, so we didn't have to repay for the land, but it was not a going concern. Mom and Dad both worked off the farm. We had a piece of raw land, and we had. I stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, Mom and Dad were wonderful and had great. I've already mentioned with great respect their contribution. But there was no income being generated. And so Teresa and I, when we came back to the farm, September 24, 1982, we took these principles and what we wanted to do, and we started. And it was, we went through 2 or 3 years where we didn't know if it was going to go. And it was about in the 4th year that we looked at each other and said, yes, we're going to make it. It's going to go. And then it went so well that it was so successful, it started attracting attention. We started getting media publicity. People came by and different things, and they started, how do you do these chickens, And so I wrote a little manual, and then I wrote the book in 1991, the Pasture Poultry Profits book, and the farm. We self-published. We researched, publishing and self-publishing, and Alan and Carolyn, shepherded us through that process. They wanted to publish it, but when I found out, what you could get if you self-published, I said, I think we'll self-publish, and we did. And the point is that multi-$1,000 investment to self-publish was from farm savings. The farm paid for that. Then when the next book, Salad Bar Beef, came along in 2 years, the farm paid for that. Now, today, yes, the information component of our business is self-sustaining and certainly carries itself and is a wonderful little thing. But this is the tension of my life, that we started this little thing from basically scratch, and it was successful enough to generate publicity. And now so many people think, well, he's not really farming; he's just living off of this, this publicity stuff. Yeah. And so every winter we sit down with the books, because Daniel, my son now, who actually runs day-to-day operations on the farm, he's extremely sensitive to this whole idea.
Oh, I'm sure.
So his credibility, his affirmation comes from the farm being a self-contained, that it's doing its thing. And so we tease out all of the information, all of this other stuff every winter, and zero right in on just those farm portions, and make sure that the farm is still, turning its profit.
And I would say to that too, Joel. Look, I know the statistics in the US that 2/3 of the registered farms in the US, the primary source of income is not from agriculture. It's only 1/3 where the primary source of income is from agriculture. I find it a little bit. I find it disingenuous for people to keep asking that question. Yes, if you get money off farm, great. I know what you actually do with it, because we've been involved, as partners for a long time. I know that you actually go and put what money you get, you put it into infrastructure on the farm, as opposed to going on a big holiday or something like that. So at least, and I don't think it's a really right question to be asking. That said, it's, I think as well that for someone like Daniel, who works so hard and so well at what he does, and Sherry as well, who've been pretty phenomenal in their transformation to another level of the farm business. It's a bit of a slight against them to keep pulling up this. And I don't think that that's what Eureka is getting at here, because I know Eureka. I think what he's saying is, well, you know, has because you were, a lot of people wouldn't know that you were already very well known in the whole grazing and pasture and holistic management circles before Michael Pollan came along.
Oh yes,
you know,
yes.
so you know,
Yeah,
so
I mean, I'd already written several books, but I think let me say one thing to that question, and I think that is very appreciative, and that is, listen, when a mom comes up and tugs on my arm I'm speaking at a conference, right, and she says she's got her little 8-year-old son there, and he's just glowy eyed, you know, he wants me to sign something for him, I'm his hero, right? She thinks, and that's pretty cool. And she says, my son wants to know what to do to be like you, you know, to be a successful farmer. And you know what I tell her? I say, get in the local theater group, get in the debate team, learn to communicate, because the communicators, the people, the storytellers of a culture are the ones who ultimately move that culture to places.
Yeah.
And if you can storytell, you can sell, you can market, you can negotiate, you can build alliances, you can create relationships. Storytelling is and which is obviously a part of communication, is probably the single most important skill set anybody can do in any business, farming or otherwise.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And, you know, and in large part, of course, the audiences that are seeing you now are a function of just that. You've got storytellers and other storytellers promulgating the whole thing, which is, you know, why we made Polyfaces, for that very, you know, we wanted to at once capture what you guys have gone through. And that's, I think that should be fairly palpable when you watch Polyfaces to see that it's, that we just certainly don't show that it's been an easy road for you. We didn't want to give that impression. And nor it should be, because life has its hardships. That's life.
Sure.
And we need to tell that it's not all rosy, and you should be prepared for that, just as happens with whatever job you or field you work in. Now we're just about out of time. I've got one question here on plans for tractors, and I think I'll be able to deal with that myself. I've got one more that's probably of use here. This is from Dan T. Eggman. I think that might be a made-up name. I hope that's not the case, that I've just offended you, Dan. But just in case you just happen to have that name, Dan. How did you go with your pasture cropping trials? Were you able to plant anything that the chooks could self-harvest?
What great question. It goes back to that first question about what are you experimenting with right now, and the pasture cropping a la Colin Seiss, for those listeners who are not familiar with Colin Seiss. We loved it. We did it. We've done it twice now, and we absolutely will do it again. We believe that there is a lot of refinement in this system. We have not used it yet with chickens or poultry. We have simply used it with grazing, but that is certainly a matter of timing, a matter of the right species, a matter of the right place. But I think that if so far our experiments have been extremely positive, and we didn't do it last year. I'm not sure we'll do it this year, but we definitely plan to do more and more of this pasture cropping. I think it's a piece of the puzzle. I think it could be as big as electric fence, to create a forage chain and to be able to move to a grain base without tearing up a prairie. I think it's just dynamite, and we will definitely be doing more of it in the future.
Now, when I stood in your field, you were initially really, really you were really emboldened by the whole thing. You thought it was going to work well, but then, and you were going to buy a cedar, and we were talking about that with Dan and whatnot, and then Daniel, and then the year, I think it was in the winter I was there, and the following spring I think it was, and you said, gee, that pasture didn't come back quite as well. It seems interesting to me that, Joel, because I've thought about your case, it seems to me that your system, because you're at 8% carbon now, because you've got X number of species in your pastures, that do you actually need it as much? Because your succession's so far behind, you then go and throw in all of these annuals. It seems to me it takes you way back. It's a tension between the needs of the omnivore and the quality of the grassland that you're trying to maintain.
Right. Well, where it did not work very well was on a piece of rented land that did not have the fertility on it. Mm. When we brought it here and duplicated it, it worked extremely well. Mm. The following spring, the pasture did come back quite well. One of the things that happened here, we got excellent growth, but we did not get on it in time. I think some of it may be a matter of timing. It got a little bit too lignified on us. Mm-hmm. But these are all refinements to make. You're right. We do not see, why did we do it last year if it was so great? Why didn't we do it? Well, because with our carbon so high, and now that we're irrigating so much, we've got so much pond water, we can irrigate with the K-line system. Last fall, we irrigated 15 acres with the K-line system, and we got 300 cow days of additional grass because of the irrigation. Mm. Well, 300 cow days is worth, $450, almost $500 to us. You would have to do something pretty dramatic to get that kind of value from a pasture cropping system, in a grazing cycle. So we're very appreciative of the diversity and the perennial. We do think that there are still niches that we'd like to fill. Hot summer with some, Sudex to finish off some calves with high sugar. It'll never be a big part of what we do, but I can certainly imagine it on, 2 to 3%, maybe 4% of the acreage to just create a little more diversity within the diversity. Yeah. In that particular acreage on that particular year.
Yeah, so Dan's backed up saying he runs 6,000 layers at Bega Valley Eggs using Joel's A-frames. So the millennial feather net, I think you'd be talking about there. So no, not an offence at my name. Thank you, guys. I play around. But I think, Dan, one of the things we're playing a lot with pasture cropping. We have a number of clients who are doing it, all of whom are at the opposite end of the carbon level and of the game here. Well, I just went to one the other day, which I put up a post on, which you might have seen, Dan, at Milking Yard Farm with Bruce and Ros there. And what we've done to comment on Joel's fertility issue on new properties is, I think it's best that there's two ways that you'll deal with this. One is that you go and buy some fertilizer and put on the base amount. It might be 50 kilos per hectare or something like that to get things going. So, because often these sites are so depleted. The other opportunity for you is, which I think is a better one, is to go and run the chickens for a year and use that feed that you're importing as your new fertilizer. And then the next year come in, because, again, don't stack yourself up with too much innovation. Just get the chickens organised, work that out. Then year 2 or 3, then you can come in and say, all right, well, now I'll start doing a bit of pasture cropping. By which time you've already built up a bit of fertility in your paddock, and you can come in and grow successfully a pasture crop. And that's what we've done on a number of properties now, because we found the same thing. If you go in and put a pasture crop in on a brand new bit of depleted ground, you're not going to find success.
That's right. So those annuals need a good supper.
They do. All right. Well, my wife has asked the question here, Joel, and I'll make this the last one because I can't ignore her. And, uh, do you vaccinate your animals, and do you have any thoughts on that? Good one, John. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah. Well, no, we do not vaccinate our animals, and my thought on it is that in general, the vaccination is an immunosuppressant, or certainly it overrides the immune system. It doesn't actually build immune systems, and so what we're and I don't want to get bogged down in the whole human vaccination, all that sort of thing debate. I will say that I think that that we can mask poor hygiene, poor sanitation, poor diet, poor sleep, over stress. We can mask those management and lifestyle issues with crutches, vaccine being one of the many crutches we have. Now, look, if I get an infection, I'm glad we have antibiotics. So I'm not against every thing that we've discovered. But I think that if we had put the amount of creativity on building immune systems, how do we create a habitat that creates a terrain that is functionally a healthy immune system? If we put as much creativity on that as we've put creativity on creating crutches so that we can not have to worry about those things, we'd probably be farther ahead of the game and be actually more healthy otherwise.
And I think that's a really great note to end our conversation on, because so much effort and energy has been spent on things that are perhaps not as, or perhaps are degenerative as opposed to regenerative. And I think that's a really great point. I'll add to people that Joel is going to be in Australia. So for those of you who are in Australia, you have on the Polyface's website a calendar of events of where you and Daniel and Sherry are going to be at any given time, and any events that you have at Polyface Farm and more broadly. But you're going to be in Australia in April, which we're always excited to see you over here and to catch up personally. And that's with the Fitzroy Basin Association up there. And then you're heading to the Netherlands and Europe. You've got a bit going on over there as well.
That's right. Yeah, I'll be in Austria, Spain, the Netherlands, and Great Britain there toward the end of April. So it's a busy April.
Yeah, well, it's great that you're going to some of the places that you haven't been to before. I imagine you haven't been to Austria before?
No, I haven't. Been to Austria.
No.
I have been to Spain, but this is a little different outfit, and I'll be doing a master class there near Madrid.
Yes.
And it'll be very exciting.
Yeah, I've heard about that from a few people, clients and associates in Spain. They're very excited to. And I know the farm that you're going to too, so that's great. And one word on Austria, just watch out for the schnapps. That's fairly powerful stuff, my friend.
Okay.
Other things.
Thanks for the warning.
Yeah, no worries. Don't worry. They're fairly persuasive too, those Austrians. Other things coming up at Polyface Farm at all, Joel? Have you got any big events, or with any other organizations you're working with?
Well, I mean, we just have our regular routine things going on here. We got people coming through, and of course we'll have our intensive discovery seminars as we normally do in July, and our regular lunatic tours. The season is upon us. The grass here is green, but we're not grazing. We're going to plan to start grazing on Monday. Mm-hmm. In other words, this coming Monday. So we're very excited about that, and excited about our new intern team coming, and lots of lots of things happening. We're developing some wonderful collaboratives here. Grass-based dairy has moved in just 3 miles away from us, so we're now offering kefir and yogurt and milk and chocolate milk to our customers. A lacto fermentation group has moved in on Afton Mountain, just close to us, and so we're offering kimchi and lacto fermented things. And a kombucha artisans moved in close, and so we're offering kombucha. So we're trying to become that local nexus of artisanal everything. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that is amazing, and that well, as you put in the Polyfaces film, imagine if you could do this on a whole region, what sort of place would you? And that's a big part of the visioning and imagining, isn't it?
Yes, it sure is.
Well, thanks so much, mate. And of course, I have to give a plug for our because I want to, and it's great. The Polyfaces film. So so if you haven't got a copy of that, you can get a copy off. You can go on the polyfaces.com website, or you can go to the polyfacefarms.com website as well. It's available through there or at their shop. And get yourself a copy there. Joel's always got new books. I forgot to ask you that question. What's the next book coming out, mate? What's that looking to be? It's always a new book.
I'm not. I'm not sure. We had our first children's book. My daughter Rachel and I came out with it last fall, and two books in 1 year was almost more than I could handle, and. So I'm thinking the next book, since now I'm editor of Stockman Grass Farmer, I have almost 30 years worth of pastoralist columns, and I'm thinking to go back and actually just take those columns. I mean, I'll probably tweak them a little, but essentially put a book together of all those columns. I think it would make some interesting reading just for people to chronologically read through. Our own thinking and progress. It'd just be an interesting.
I think that's a great idea. I've always enjoyed it when people have done that sort of thing, and like you say, over 30 years, that's quite a stretch, and it would give people a sense of the changes that you've seen, and because you've basically been, at the forefront of this for a long time, and so you will see those changes occur, which is awesome. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, mate. It's been always an honour and a privilege to be around you and be led by you, as so many are, and to be a good friend. It's really great. So I really appreciate you giving up your time today, and to your family for all that they're doing and all the support, and to your team there at Polyface, Wendy and all there. It's always wonderful to work with you all, and I can only wish you the very best, and a great trip in April, and we look forward to catching up with you then.
Yes, likewise, and all that is mutual, Darren. You guys are lights in a world, and we're just privileged to count you among our dearest friends. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, mate. And just for the rest of you who are watching and listening, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. There's a few questions that are still live, which I thought would be best if I dealt with in the comments, because I'll be able to put a few points there and plans and that sort of thing. Otherwise, keep an eye out. I think tomorrow or the next day we're going to have quite a big announcement as far as the future of Regrarians is concerned. This being our 25th year, or 26th year actually, where we're looking to have a fairly big change and shake up in our business model. So keep an eye out for that in the next couple of days, where we'll make those announcements. And we look forward to catching up with people ourselves across the eastern seaboard here in Australia, where we'll be running we'll be starting the next Rex farm planning program in April. So keep an eye out for that. And we'll also be up in the Fitzroy Basin area with Joel for a few days as they do that program over a week based at Rockhampton and Emerald. And we're also next week. I go for a week-long tour of North Queensland, of the dry tropics, where we'll be going to doing a workshop at a 78,000 acre farm called Ulkenbar Station. And then we're at Margaret Creek at a mango farm doing a workshop there on farm planning. And then we're also doing one at a smaller property just outside of smaller for up there. I think it's about 500 acres still, at a property where we're doing a farm planning program for smaller landholders in that region. So, and then we're up in further north in May. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you've got any further questions or you want to keep the comment rolling, well then just do that in the comments line here. And please share the discussion with others. That's part of why we do it. Thanks again to you, Joel. And I look forward to catching up with you in person next month, mate. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right. Take care, mate.
Great. Thanks, Darren.
No worries, mate.
Take care.
Hooray.
Bye.